Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm Paddy Boylan. Today, joining me are my co-hosts Alex Eldridge.
Hello.
And James Healy. James Healy. It's Healy. I'm sorry.
What did you call me?
I put an additional emphasis on the wrong syllable.
You've Irished up my name.
Is that an Irish thing?
Sounds Irish.
Okay, maybe. Well, James Healy. Today we're going to be discussing archetypes, cliches, and stereotypes. What they are, when one ends and one begins, how to use them, and maybe when we shouldn't use them. Let's find out how deep down that particular rabbit hole we go. First of all, gents, how are we?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm
good.
Very well. The sun is shining. It's a weekend, can't complain.
How you doing, James?
Yeah, I'm great. No complaints here.
Fantastic. So the perpetual question, what have we been reading or watching or doing or having done to us that we've been drawing inspiration from in our week? Jump in anytime.
Yeah, all right. I've been going over the Mutiny on the Bounty again, which I read the first time and I know I was raving about. I probably was raving about it on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, you were talking with Ali about it because she's writing obviously historical fiction about an Australian mutiny. So
me and Ali have decided to, it's sort of a minor thing, we've decided to do some sort of collaboration on, we're not sure exactly what the project will be, but some retelling of that in like a space opera format.
You've been talking about that idea for a little while now, actually.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I had no idea you were talking to Ali about doing something about that.
It's nothing set in stone, and I may cut this out if she doesn't want to spill the beans on that too early, but yeah, that's what we've been considering. So that's very exciting.
Spill those beans. Spill them.
Also, I am just in the final stages of putting together my short story collection. So I'm just going through the final grammatical proofread of that to make sure that Grammarly has been very helpful with that, actually, just for a final pass. When you think you've got everything, there's just those little things that you miss. So yeah, I'm going to put that out early August, which would be good.
Grammarly is good. Grammarly is good. I was recommending that to you as well, James.
Yeah.
Even the free version is very helpful. Pro tip, if you're listening or watching this, try Grammarly. We're not getting paid for this. This is a completely free shit.
Genuine advice.
Yeah, it's very helpful. It's like a level up from the basic spell checker. James, what have you been up to?
I've been reading The Naked and the Dead by Norman Mailer.
It's an amazing name.
Yeah, it's pretty dark, eh? It's a story set in during the war in the Pacific, following like American troops kind of stationed on some small island with the Japanese stationed on the other side. Really good story. I think it was his first novel. He wrote it when he was 24. It was like a big sweeping epic that kind of went through all of these like characters' lives and stuff, and was all about the class distinctions in America at the time and how there were some soldiers who came from like really underclass backgrounds, and the officers came from like the upper class backgrounds and stuff like this, and the different lives they were potentially going back to after the war. Really, really good, really well written, really interesting story.
Written by a 24-year-old. That's impressive. I don't think I would be able to have that kind of a grip on culture and commentary of it at 24. I could barely tie my shoes. So yeah.
Well, I kind of got the impression that maybe he went to war himself. I think he was probably there, so he was probably writing about the people he met and the observations that he'd made.
Right.
I don't know if he did, though. He may have just come up
I'm pretty sure he did. I'm pretty sure he was in the Pacific War. I was just reading about this recently, and some people said that it was. I think the description of it was that it was so detailed and so thing that like it couldn't not be true. Like the observations and things some of them were so mundane and sort of dry and boring. There was almost like a transcript. So yeah, I'm fairly certain that he was in that war.
Like there's huge chapters which are kind of based around just characters carrying a machine gun from one point to another. And it's the details about the fatigue and the exhaustion that they're going through rather than big crazy battles and action and losing friends. It's about like the mundane day to day of like we have to set up a tent again, we have to dig lines again and stuff like that.
I actually love that kind of stuff. I'm a real sucker for it. I don't know if you guys ever watched Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the same extent, but I think one of the great things about that is like the nitty gritty day-to-day stuff of it. Yeah, that sounds excellent. What's it called again, one more time?
The Naked and the Dead.
The Naked and the Dead. God damn. So I've been reading something that you've recommended, or rather you mentioned, that I said, wow, that sounds great. I'm reading Conclave by, I'm going to say Richard Harris.
Yes, and also it's great that you've got his name right, because I've been calling him Richard Green.
No, you called him Robert Green, actually.
There's no way to fix that in post, unfortunately.
Yeah. We started releasing episodes, and I was just like, oh no.
let's try and put that in the episode description so that, yeah. But if we did get like an angry email from him, that'd be a pretty great recognition. Like, I think you've made it as a podcast when getting angry authors emailing you.
Absolutely. I wonder if I'll reach out and just make a formal apology.
Put a link in the.
I'm just not great with names.
Yeah, put a link to the podcast as well. You know, because why not chill it?
Yeah. Also, congratulations on having something new to bring to the table for this part of the conversation. I'm delighted you finished Moby Dick.
Yeah. Oh, and finished Moby Dick. My white whale has finally been found. It was good. It was good. Yeah. Very, very long. Very, very thought-provoking. I mean, slow-paced. I'm not going to say it drags, but it definitely. It's a leisurely pace. We'll say that. But I'm glad I read it. It was very, very thought-provoking. And Conclave, for those who haven't listened to that episode, is about the Pope dies and the cardinals are choosing a new Pope and all the political machinations that go on in the Vatican around that. And it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love a good halls of power drama and like a peek at how the sausage is made politically. That's so engaging.
And scenes which are literally just about old men counting end up being like really tense and really dramatic.
Yes.
Because of all of the context that's gone into it.
Yeah. Oh, and everything that's at stake as well. Like you really get the sense, at least from their point of view, like this is the most important thing in the world. Yeah. Like choosing a pope is absolutely something you can't get wrong.
The different directions that they feel it can take and the implications that can have for the world. And good. It's a good way of presenting something from the perspective of characters. I think it's important, and then you feel the importance of it. Yeah,
absolutely. Although at the risk of me talking about what I've been reading going on way too long now, and we can always prune it later.
You've earned it.
Thank you. One thing I've had to do though, I'm generally pretty bad with names as it is. I need to keep a Google Keep, which is like a little notes document open, and write down the name of every new character that I encounter. Like this guy, African guy believes in this. This guy, blah 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 blah. Otherwise, the names mean nothing to me.
Yeah.
That was actually the reason I stopped reading Game of Thrones, is because I couldn't keep up with all of the different characters.
Filling documents.
Yeah.
So, Paddy, can I just like dig into that a little bit? Is it the names themselves, or you're like, I'm struggling to recall this character's motivations and stuff, or is it's like specifically the names?
It's specifically the names. It's specifically the names. They're just a jumble of. I mean, names don't mean anything. They're just like made up sounds, and I don't know why I can't hold on to them very well. You guys obviously don't have that problem.
I just kind of let it happen, and if I'm like, oh, I can't tell if these are two different characters or if they're the same, then I'm just like, it's obviously not that important to me then whether they are. And I feel like important enough characters will rise to the top of that, and characters that aren't that important will blend together. Which is okay with.
You ever been in a movie and just realize halfway through you're like, I don't know any of these people's names? That happens all the time, and I'm like, I guess it wasn't that important.
I guess
one of my favorite films is called I think a Middle Eastern martial arts movie called The Raid. And the first time I watched it, I enjoyed it so much because I mixed up who the main character was.
Why did that make it a better watch?
Because all the characters are like SWAT guys that go into this building, get attacked by the residents in the building, and just martial arts their way out of it. But I thought that the main character was like the leader of the team. So the leader of the team goes one way, but the protagonist goes another way. So I was like so invested in this like subplot of this like this young guy who's like against all odds is like managing to like fight his way out of it. And I was like, oh, the protagonist isn't really doing that much at all. This other guy in the subplot is incredible.
What's interesting, there's probably something to be said there for like how to write a good subplot. Like if that was accidentally a really good subplot, that's a template there for a story.
Yeah, break expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the topic of the day: archetypes, stereotypes, and cliches. One of the things that came to my mind when researching it is I don't think I was entirely sure, and maybe I'm still not, on the demarcation between an archetype and a stereotype. Like I think we'd all agree that they seem, if not two sides of the same coin, then related to each other. Do you guys have any?
I could take a swing at that for sure.
Yeah.
So I think an archetype would be kind of like a representation of probably a role within the story. And the archetype might be the mentor or the sidekick or the kind of the hero, or like what's called the lance, which is kind of like the second to the hero. If you're having a story about like a group going on a mission, there's often the main leader, and there's the lance, and he's kind of like the second in command.
I'm thinking Top Gun and his homoerotic love interest.
Yeah, but I wonder if that was, because there wasn't a team, that could just be the main character and the sidekick. Although the homoerotic love interest was almost, he was the antagonist kind of, wasn't he?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
I'm thinking of Goose as being the sidekick. So those things would be like archetypes, whereas a stereotype is like, oh, that's this type of character rather than this type of role within the story. It's more like, oh, that's this type of character. That's the bumbling cop or the cynical alcoholic cop. These are kind of stereotypes that we kind of recognize. They'd be a little bit closer to cliches, but then they might be slightly different from cliches as well, as in a cliche is kind of a stereotype that's become tired.
Yeah, I would say I would probably fine-tune that a little bit and say that archetypes are universal to all stories, or at least certain subsets of stories. There are archetypes in, even the tarot, those are based on archetypes. Like the old man, and then the child,
the empress, and the chariot, and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I would say those are more universal across storytelling, and I think stereotypes are specific to cultures. And I'd say I would go so far as to say that stereotypes are the character equivalents of cliches. That's probably how I would frame that. But archetypes, I think, are a little broader. I don't know if that dovetails what you were saying there, James, but I think it's kind of similar.
Yeah.
It seems to me, at least to a point, that one of the differences between an archetype and a stereotype is the granularity of the detail you go into. Like you were saying, James, you can have, I don't remember the specific examples you gave, but like the corrupt mayor or the hero going on a journey, that's quite zoomed out. There's not a lot of detail there. It's a very loose framework. A stereotype begins when you start to fill it with more details. They're both sort of, I think you could say like both of them are things that the author can use to hang the reader's expectation on. You don't need to start from scratch. If you've got like a corrupt mayor type character, people know, okay, well, I know this archetype, I get it. Okay, I've got some prior expectation that I can bring, and we can move the story on from there. But if you started to like detail the mayor's nationality and his accent and maybe base him on like a real politician, that's when a stereotype begins. It's when you start to fill in too many details. What do you guys think about that?
You mean you're filling in details with like the expected details?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense, yeah. Because you could have like the corrupt mayor and then give him a completely different kind of vibe or personality from the kind of character you'd expect to be a corrupt mayor, or completely different motivations for why he is corrupt. And that would seem like a really original character, but it started with a stereotype. But then if you're filling him in and he's kind of like, oh yeah, he's just greedy and that's why he's corrupt and that's why he's doing his whatever, then it becomes very stereotyped. And I think that would drift over then into cliche, because that's like we've seen that before a bunch of times.
Do we think that all stereotypes are necessarily cliches? Can they ever
Not
be
necessarily.
different things?
I think that they can become, and I think that an archetype can become a cliche as well if it just follows the same format as always before. You've always got like the wizened old man who's coming in to serve as the mentor. That can be like a really, really good character if you develop it in an original way. But if you just make it a stereotype and then keep adding in, well, this worked before, this worked before, this worked before, it's just a cliche. You've just got an Obi Wan, Gandalf type of character.
Mm-hmm. Or I'm thinking Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say it's almost as if, yeah, what I was saying before about stereotypes and cliches being like stereotypes being like a character equivalent of a cliche. If you have it, if you've seen the same role repeated too many times with too few variations, it becomes that. So let's take those two examples you thought of, like Gandalf and also Obi Wan. Would we say those? And I'm going to try and figure this out in real time. Would we say those are stereotypes? Let me see. So I don't think they are. I think they are the archetypes of the mentor or the old man, because they both come from cultural contexts in which they've sort of invented themselves, like within the context of the Star Wars universe, within the context of even a space opera. Star Wars was one of the originators of those, really, I suppose. I can't really speak to that 100%, but you know, that is a pretty novel role within that. You know, like he's an old guy. He's got a lot of like experience with this mysterious thing. There are a lot of factors that separate that from, until that point, something that was a cliche and something that was obviously recognizable. Likewise, Gandalf, I think he started the idea of like there's always been old magical men, but like I think the sense of power he had in what you've got in Lord of the Rings, I think maybe that was a little bit of a break from, just the old guy going, oh, beware, like, which does seem like it might have been a stereotype. I don't know, those are my thoughts.
No, I agree with you. I think Obi-Wan, Gandalf, and Dumbledore are all the archetypes of like the mentor. But I do think they're all in their own right very original characters. So I don't think they're cliched at all. I think they have maybe a few similar stereotypes. Obi-Wan and Gandalf both had kind of like quite a strong Buddhist-y kind of hippie vibe, and then Gandalf and Dumbledore, very powerful magicians, and then all three of them exit the story at a certain point in order to allow the main character to kind of step into the role of the hero. Those are all archetypal type things. So I wouldn't call them cliched at all.
Do we need to define what an archetype is, or are we assuming that our audience will know?
I think it might.
Yeah, let's hammer down on it a bit stronger. Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys want to give a shot at it?
I might get a dictionary definition for it. And James, if you want to have a crack at that, I'll look it up and see if we can define that.
Let me give it a try.
That's a lot put on your shoulders all of a sudden, but
yeah, we'll see how close I can get.
Good luck, James Yalley.
I'm trying to remember what the word archetype actually means in itself in isolation. I guess an archetype is kind of like a representation of a certain idea or like a model of a character in a story. And I think archetypes are almost always associated with stories. I don't know if they have another meaning outside of that, or that might just be like the writer in me that doesn't recognize the word from any other area. The obvious archetype is that every story is going to have a protagonist, and the archetype of that then is it's often the hero. The most common type of hero archetype is kind of like the hero who goes out on a mission to defeat some kind of evil, and they go out on this journey, and then they kind of go through certain stages of a journey, and they end up coming home in the end a different and better person. There's almost always then a mentor, and this is an archetype of someone who is kind of like a guiding hand within that story. They may not necessarily be a mentor, they may be some kind of possibly supernatural force or some kind of wise person who kind of gives the character some information and helps them along their journey. Then there's going to be the antagonist, which is the kind of main force which is stopping the hero from going on their journey. And this isn't necessarily big adventure stories. This can be in a detective story, you're going to have the killer. In a romance story, there's probably going to be someone. I don't know how a romance story works with antagonist. I don't know if the antagonist.
I haven't read enough romance.
Is it like the love interest? I don't know what that is. I probably shouldn't bother up. Yeah, there's going to be an antagonist. There's going to be a hero. There's going to be a mentor. There's going to be like a smaller cast of characters. There's definitely going to be some kind of sidekick. There may be a love interest, and these are all archetypes that kind of fill certain roles within a story. They don't necessarily have to have them, but there are certain things that a story is definitely going to have. It's definitely going to have a protagonist. It's definitely going to have an antagonist.
These recurring motifs that seem to appear again and again in certain culture story, even stories across different cultures.
I've answered that to the best of my ability now.
I think that's pretty much it. And I don't think
we
we should labor this too long, because there's going to be a lot of people that are like, yes, I know what an archetype is. Please move on. But I think that's more or less it. Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say that the dictionary definition says it is a pattern model from which all things are the same are copied. So you were pretty much bang on. I want to do stereotypes, so we're really clear. Don't want to.
Thank you once again, dictionary definitions, for just getting the absolute distilled meaning of something.
Just what it is. And then a stereotype is a simplified and standardized conception or image invested with special meaning and held in common by members of a group. So it's simplified and it's standardized. So what it is a reduction of the archetype, I guess, to a specific mold that does not necessarily fit within the context of what you're working with, because life is complex and narrative is complex. So I think that's the difference between the archetype is the big broad one that you can encapsulate it all in. The stereotype is the simplified and standardized.
That's what I was trying to get across with like granularized, and like a stereotype is a more detailed thing. Going back to your analogy of Gandalf, Obi Wan, and Dumbledore, the three wise wizards. Yeah, I would almost argue that they can't be stereotypes, and maybe this is not correct at all, because they have no ties to our actual world. It seems to me when I think about stereotypes, they're always hung upon existing cultural, racial, demographic things from the world, whereas
but you could have a stereotypical goblin, right? You have in your head.
Okay, yes, that's true.
You're right.
Well,
I guess you could.
I'd say that they specifically can't be stereotypes. Certainly, Gandalf and Obi Wan, because they were the originators of kind of that thing. Now, if you were to go and make a powerful wizard who was old and wizened, and you would go on an adventure with something, you would immediately point to that and go, well, that kind of looks like Gandalf. And that, I think, has now become like, because Gandalf is, I mean, he's a little bit more of a complex character, but it would be very easy to reduce that character down to something very simplified and stereotypical. So I think, they could easily be stereotyped, but I think themselves aren't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It does. I've got a definition from masterclass.com, and then the URL goes on from there, but I'm not going to read out all 100 characters of it. Archetype helps frame a story, while stereotype only serves as a substitute for complex people. Obviously, this is talking about characters. And so Hero on a Quest, archetype. The Drunken Russian, stereotype. And I guess as writers, of course, there's always the problem of, are we introducing stereotypes that lean lazily on existing ideas, and we're using that as a crutch instead of writing complex, detailed characters? And then I wanted to move that into, guys, to what extent do you think it's okay? And what does okay mean? We can discuss that. To use and lean on stereotypes, how much should we consciously try and push against it as writers? Are there times when you don't like to see it in things you read, or are there times where it makes you smile and think like, yeah, okay, I know this guy, I know this character in the stereotype?
Well, I actually, and I'm going to give an example of this a little bit later, I actually like to use a stereotype as a basis for a framework to present with the audience something that they think they recognize and something they might even want to write off initially. Use that as a base framework to then explore the notions of that and go, oh, actually, this guy's a little bit more complex. Because there's a foundational truth to a stereotype. Essentially, like, they become stereotypes for a reason, but like they said, they are generally an oversimplification. So I like using that framework and going like, yeah, you know this guy, you've seen this guy before, right? And you're like, yeah, I know that. But then as it goes on in the story or whatever it is, you discover that it's a little more than it initially appears to be. So I like using them as a framework initially to start off with.
That old thing of introduce the stereotype but then undermine and subvert it. Which
Totally.
It's been a while since I did Pride and Prejudice in school, but isn't that sort of the crux of the story? We're presented with these some fairly stereotypical, you're smiling, James. Some very stereotypical characters which we think we recognize, and then she very cleverly shows us that actually our assumptions were wrong, and that the characters are very different. The bait and switch is very satisfying.
Yeah, I'd say that's a very good analogy, actually.
James, did you have some thoughts though?
No.
Okay. One place where we see, like you were saying, Alex, you're talking about the idea of using a stereotype as a baseline and then building from it or subverting it, which is interesting, and I think true. It's a good starting point. What comes to mind when I hear that is fantasy, and especially high fantasy, right? I don't think there's not many genres that are more filled with like tropes, right? You've got like wizards and dwarves and elves and stuff, and obviously these get subverted and reinvented, but a lot of times these things get called up again and again in stories. And I've had conversations with people before where they're like, if you're going to write high fantasy, you shouldn't use elves and dwarves and wizards and things because they're done and they're tired and it's lazy. So on the one hand, you could consider them as cliches, but on the other hand, you can introduce them as these starting points that the audience just recognizes already. So you don't need to go and explain all of the details about your magic system. If you just talk about wizards, you don't need to necessarily explain all of the details about these different diverse creatures if you use goblins, elves, and dwarves. And then one of the things you can do by using these tropes or cliches is develop it and change it and work from it or subvert it in interesting and surprising ways. I can't think of, sorry, James, you go ahead.
I completely agree with that. I think that is the best use of stereotypes and even cliches in a story. Is if you want to maybe introduce a minor character, you don't have the time to do a whole ton of character development or explain who this is. You put in something that the reader will recognize from the context of other stories or maybe from real life, and they'll say, oh, okay, that's this type of person. Introduce them in a few lines, and like you said earlier, like the Drunken Russian, if you just kind of pop that in, you kind of have a template for a character right there within just a few lines, and you don't have to spend a ton of time developing them. They might have a very small role in the story, so you bring in all this other context to do the character development for you. And if you decide to make them a larger character in the story, then you just build upon that character, and all of a sudden you've got an interesting character that maybe started off as something that was cliched, but then you've put in all of this depth to make them a real defined character with depth.
It's like a scaffold to hang things on, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Then, of course, on the other hand, cliches, or rather stereotypes, can be harmful. I mean, arguably, I would say they can be harmful. They can be things that can perpetuate some fairly bad myths and ideas. What do you guys think about that? Should we, as authors, do we have a responsibility to try and lean away from that? Or do we have artistic license to go where we will?
Yeah, I was talking about this to someone. I made a video on TikTok a couple of days ago about basically recognizing the difference between authorial intent and like authorial prejudice, essentially, and being like the example I used, of course, was like Stephen King having a lot of there's a lot of he often does a lot of the women in his books are quite sort of meek, and they're just not portrayed particularly well. They like cry an awful lot, like every single book, like every woman will cry at least once.
I've only read one Stephen King story. It was the one about the group on the raft of teens, and there's like a monster in the water.
Yeah.
And so 100% of my experience of Stephen King is exactly that. The two male characters were brave and knew what they were doing, and the females were.
Well, there's one on that who's not too bad. She just gets taken off guard. The other one is definitely portrayed not great. But so that I was arguing how that's one side of it, but then another side of it is using racist language, for example. And you definitely cannot get away with that anymore in terms of writing today, I don't think. But certainly back in the day, using that to present a character, a cliche, it's an easy byword to be like, this person is terrible. Like, and we as an audience recognize that, but then there's the question of, well, is it okay to use that language? Because that sort of further perpetuates the use of that language, for example.
Do you mean a character using
racist
language and things like that?
You could even go to the point of the narrator using it, which is pretty bold. But certainly a character, yeah.
Well, I suppose what I would ask then is the narrator in that particular story a character themselves? Because in some stories,
and
the narrator is clearly a character that's telling a point of view, and in some stories, it's like a word of God type, just omniscient voice.
I think I know what you mean. Is like if you have a character who is obviously maybe a racist character, or maybe it's a story that's set at a certain time when people were racist and they spoke a certain way. Is it okay to have them using that language, or are you then perpetuating stereotypes? Are you perpetuating negative images and stuff? And that's an incredibly delicate thing to try to approach. I personally wouldn't know how to begin going about that, to frame it in the right way. Obviously, if you're writing something that's kind of like set at a certain time when there were certain attitudes, you need to finish my sentence.
You need to be authentic, right?
Yeah, well, you need to be authentic, but then you also need
authenticity.
to frame it from a certain way. So it depends on who your POV character is.
Yeah, I've heard of people trying not to. Sorry, to cut you off. I've heard of people trying not to use that language to represent it in a way that is able to avoid that. And still convey a prejudice, like within the context of the character. But I don't know. It's an interesting discussion.
I mean, this is almost something that we should consider doing an episode on. Although I hesitate to think any of us have like the authority to be able to speak on this subject. This is getting a little off the beaten path, but I will just throw in that it's like, as we're writers, we're trying to make authentic work. We're trying to make things that reflect the world, and we're trying to say something that's important. It's very hard to do that if we don't reflect the world as it is. But we digress. Do we try and lean away from stereotypes in our own writing? Do we embrace it to a point?
Go ahead. Something that I really like to do is to kind of take some of my favorite stereotypes, or like kind of my favorite almost cliched characters, and kind of make them like the central character of the story, and then completely dissect like who they are and how they would really be in real life. I love the idea of like the lone post-apocalyptic survivor type, but then of course this would be someone who would just be riddled with neuroticism and PTSD and social complications and trauma. And I love the idea of trying to take that, bring in that stereotype, introduce them the same way every one of those characters is kind of introduced, and then actually dig into like, who is this person? What's happened to them? Why are they this way? What's going on? Give them a little hug. I love that idea. I love the idea of taking a stereotype and a cliche and then trying to like just paint so much reality onto them to kind of like just give it an original vibe.
That's a fascinating idea, actually. Even taking like the implacable hero who cannot be moved and never wavers, and like breaking down like, what's wrong with this person? Why is it that they're so emotionally unresponsive? Like, what happened to them to make them that way? I've never actually thought about that. Why are
you so stubborn? Why do you insist on saving everyone? What happened to you in your past?
And maybe also are there some circumstances where those things which are the cliched positives work against them? Maybe in a delicate social situation, they're absolutely unable to navigate it because they don't feel and they're implacable. Alex, you talked about how you're okay with using stereotypes and cliches as a starting point. Are there any times when maybe you've been writing and you've had pause at thinking, this is too much of a stereotype, this is perhaps lazy or perhaps offensive? Or
I'm trying to think of a specific. There have been a few short stories that I've wrote that have just sort of gone nowhere because I'm just like, this character isn't very interesting. Trying to think all the characters I've done. I think we all sort of tend to fall into basic character molds of things. Like my protagonists are always pretty brash. They're pretty like, they're usually pretty young or naive. I'm trying to think of. So I think we all fall into molds, but I can't think of any specific thing where I've started with something that's very cliche and gone like it's just gone too far into that. Because I sort of tend to follow where the character goes, and very rarely will they just be like, no, I'm just this. There's a few, but I'll always just try and sort of swerve away from absolute cliche. So nothing's coming off the top of my head. I'm sure I have though at some point.
What about the idea of responsibility as authors to not lenient stereotypes? Do we have responsibility to subvert stereotypes and expectations? And I'll give an example from something that I do. I think if I uncritically examine my own work, I'll have a tendency to write male characters. I don't like that in myself, but it's what I do. There's this whole psychological phenomenon of defaulting. Like if you were going to gender an object, like this is my computer, you'd call it Mr. Computer as opposed to Miss. That's something I'm conscious of. And so I try to actively think, well, could I write this character as a woman? And if I could, maybe I should. And that's as a way to push against my own, I guess, unconscious bias and unconscious prejudice. Is that something you guys ever take into account when writing characters? Are there ever times when you want to actively push against your tendency to make the cliches that you tend to fall into?
Yeah, definitely. Because I do find I do the same thing. I'll tend to, depending on the character, I'll often like come up with a character and I'll have them as a male. But then I'm also like, I think that representation of women in literature, like women are predominantly massively underrepresented. Like hero characters and kind of strong characters are often, just often isn't enough of them. I've read a lot of kind of accounts about how a lot of women protagonists are in maybe love stories or in kind of mystery stories where they're kind of like painted as the same kind of character all the time, and there isn't that many variation of female characters. So it is kind of important to me to try to represent everybody and try to represent enough different types of characters of people within my own work that it just does change like what's already there. Like if the canon is just the same type of character, you do want to come in and make something that's a bit different and make kind of a heroic type character or a strong type character or something like that. So I do often take a step back and say, do these characters need to be the gender or even like the race that I've just unconsciously made them? And I could just be like, you know what, it actually doesn't matter. I could just move these around, and it's not that much about the personality. It's not that much about the role that they're doing. It's like who the character feels like, and I could easily move this way or move that way.
And I think a lot of the time, if you find that the story doesn't suffer and the character doesn't suffer for it, then why not do that? At the very least, it makes for a more interesting, less predictable story, I think, by just choosing the path less traveled. Alex, you got any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I've found myself writing I'm actually writing a novella right now that's about a research team that goes down into this sinkhole in China.
Yeah.
Which is really fun to write. Now, I'm writing that from the perspective of a woman, and it's a pretty confronting scene in that. And I 100% know I'm going to have to go to my girlfriend and just be like, "Hey, has this been represented in a way that is appropriate?" But yeah, I think it's easier to fall back on, let's say as male writers, which the three of us are, it's easier for us to fall back on the perspective of writing men because that's what we know, and we can very accurately predict how someone will act in that situation. I think that is more difficult with women as a man.
I think that's a dangerous like assumption to make, because I think you often assume, like, I know that not all men would react to, let's say, someone kicks down the front door. Like, I don't think all men would like necessarily react the same way to that.
Yeah, totally.
So I think you kind of like, I'm always trying to catch myself from doing the same thing and assuming that, oh, it's a male character, so he'll react the way I'll react to that.
Yeah, well, I'm not necessarily suggesting that all male characters would react in that same certain way, but certainly there's the tendency to lean towards what you know is sort of what I'm saying. So writing from the perspective of a woman, it can be more challenging. Just making sure that you're just making sure there's a authenticity to it and a reality to it, and you know. So I think it's probably a really good thing to have. What's the term? You know, readers who are able to check your work and see how it's working. But that goes for all different sort of you know, races and substratas of society. If you're not writing from the perspective of who you are,
absolutely. One way to avoid cliches and stereotypes is probably just, as is the answer to so many problems in writing, have other people read your work, have a writing group that are honest, and tell them, well, and rely on them to be able to say, like, this character's a cliche, this character's not a stereotype, this is lazy writing.
I've gotten a lot of I could write a lot of stuff that's set in America, but I've been gotten feedback from a lot of people that, like, my character's dialogue and my character's thought processes are very Irish. And I'm
That's
kind of like, oh, I didn't quite realize that there was a thing there.
that's
And they're like,
very
no,
interesting.
yeah, this
What
is
does that
very,
mean?
very Irishy approaches to all of this. And I'm kind of like, okay, I didn't quite catch that.
So
myself.
yeah, I actually don't know what inherently that is
Yeah,
either. I mean, I can think about what I think I know what like an American approach and worldview, et cetera, would be, but I don't even know what that would mean for like the Irish mindset. Do you want to elaborate at all?
Well, kind of dialogue is kind of an obvious one. There's a lot of phrases that I wouldn't quite recognize as being like Irish ways of constructing a sentence. But definitely in approaches to things, I think there could be a very almost knee-jerk, bleak outlook on things if you're Irish, or a very it's almost like gallows humor, or kind of like expecting things to be bad but kind of accepting that they will be bad, whereas then an American attitude can be a little bit more, or so I've been told, like the Americans be a little bit more likely to kind of look for, I see things as positive. But then again, I tend to write characters in pretty bleak environments, so I can kind of argue that like maybe they were that way and now they've become this way. That's kind of my way of trying to push that through without doing too much rewriting.
It would be interesting if people that don't know you and your own like nationality would be able to pick up on characters not quite reflecting the culture of origin that where they're from, or whether they just wouldn't pick up on it at all. And we were just talking.
I'm hoping they just read as original.
They read as bleak. They certainly read as bleak, but I've never thought like, is that really someone who lives up in the very north of North America would think? But I don't. I'm not true to that area. I guess like we just have to hope as authors that we are writing characters that have a certain degree of universality to them and don't appear absolutely wrong for their time and place. No, I was talking about being like substituting the gender of a character one for another. But I suppose with anything like that there is also the experience that one group of people in the world has to the experience of another group of people in the world probably does in some way change the way they see the world, the way they react to the world, their behaviors, their actions. And that's difficult. I don't know what the answer to that is as an author myself, other than just write what we know, guess what we can't, and hope that we don't absolutely misrepresent people and get things really wrong.
Yeah, I'm currently doing a fair bit of research into Japanese culture in like the 1920s, 1930s, because I wanted to write a story based in during the Pacific War, towards the end of World War II, from the perspective of Japanese soldiers. And part of me was thinking, oh, I'll just write it like a soldier. But then of course I was reading about like the culture at the time and the different attitudes towards the war that they were in and the different attitudes towards religion and stuff. And I realized that the attitudes would have been very different from kind of the English and the American soldiers who were going in. Obviously, like nobody wants to die. And there's a bunch of things that would be universally human. But then
I think even attitudes to death are different with the Japanese army at the time.
Yeah, like so many different, because the cultures that they've come from and the different situations that they were in.
Yeah.
So it is just a ton of research and a ton of trying to see things from that perspective. And you're just trying to kind of put yourself into the shoes of the characters. Because I feel like there's almost no fun in writing a story if you're not going to like really get inside the mindset of a person and then try to like look at the world from their angle.
Absolutely. It would be a shame if that wasn't written. Just do as much research as you can, prepare yourself as much as you can, and then put it out into the world and be willing to change things if it just doesn't reflect truth at all.
Yeah.
There is always that worry of, I know personally myself, I'm always worried about falling into patterns of cliche, or maybe not even necessarily patterns of cliche,
Absolutely.
but just patterns of repetition in terms of what I do. I read a lot of authors, and if you follow their timeline through, you do start seeing a lot of similarities and things, and a lot of lazy character choices and things like that.
Yep,
and
you definitely do. You definitely do.
And I think part of that is just maybe people do just have a limited capacity for being able to create so many different kind of characters without really investing in like, well, I've lived this experience, so I'm going to represent at least these thought processes. But as James is saying, you can always take the time to study and understand, and there's so many resources out there now that it's sort of a disservice to yourself and your readers not to invest in presenting lived experiences that are authentic.
Authenticity. To play devil's advocate, I don't even know if I necessarily even believe this, but like with those authors, maybe there is something to be said of, if I have a strong stereotype, archetype, whatever I want to call it, and it works, and my readers respond to it, and I know it works, and my readers won't rebel if I do it again, is there actually anything wrong with using it again? Do I need to reinvent the wheel every time? If I've got these like stock standard characters, and again, my readers don't mind that, is that necessarily a problem?
Not necessarily. I think one of my favorite cliched scenes, and you come across it again and again and again, is where like the hero arrives into town and he goes to the local tavern and he gets into an altercation with like the bully of the town, and then demonstrates that he's got more competency in some area than anyone was expecting. I don't know how many times I've seen that same thing done different ways.
It doesn't
I love
matter.
it every time. It's great. Like, you don't need to change it.
I'm thinking
something universally like cathartic about seeing a bully mess with the wrong person, and then it's a great way of introducing the attitude of the character and maybe what they can and can't do, and it's a great way of defining them as different from other characters of that type, because I've seen some characters talk the way out of it, I've seen some characters fight the way out of it, I've seen some characters pull out a wand and do something, and it's always fun, it's always enjoyable, and it's a totally cliched scene. It's one of the most done scenes I think that there is out there.
I think there's something universal about that, like trumping the bully thing. Like whenever I see that, I always get like a little rise, like you always feel that like outrage, and then it's just so satisfying when the altercation is won. I mean, usually violently, but not necessarily.
It's like a universal justice comes in on the injustice that's happening, which gives us a little kick, that was supposed to happen like that.
As someone wiser than me once said, sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason. And sometimes these like devices in literature and film and stuff, they're just really effective. Like they've been honed to the point of being like absolute ballistic missiles in on certain parts of our psychology. And they just, like the entire like 80s action film genre from American film. I mean, that's like, I'm not going to say there's nothing inventive or new about it, but it is very much relying on tropes. And I love that shit. I can't help it. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, this has been very enlightening. I don't think we've solved anything, but hopefully we've given our listeners something to think about at least, and something to ponder on, and given ourselves something to ponder on and think about. Alex, I believe you have a reading for us from your work, Challenger. And I believe you mentioned that it also deals with some stereotypes in your own writing. So that will be...
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. So I thought it was funny, like one of the first stereotypes I think you brought up, Paddy, was the drunken Russian. So this is...
he did cross my mind when I thought of that example. But he's also my favorite character in the story, so go figure.
Yeah. And it was one of those things that it just... I'm just trying to find a bit where it is. It was one of those things that it just started like, oh yeah, he'll just be a big brother sort of thing. But basically in the story, the character is represented here as he's sort of like kind of like a mentor figure to the main character, but he's just this big burly sort of Russian. So I'll just read through a little bit of where that starts. He walked across the road through the park to the door of Vasily's apartment building. He looked at the ancient buzzer attached to the door and grinned to himself. When, he wondered, was the last time anyone had used a buzzer instead of feeding through? That's the technology in this scene. Just for kicks, he pressed it and was surprised to hear Vasily's band-past voice at the other end splutter and say, "Come up, Laser." He pronounced laser like lacer. The door was open and Miles walked in and looked around the room. It was small but tastefully decorated. A couple of Mooka reprints and some modern art dotted the walls, most indefinable shapes with voluptuous curves. The rest of the room was in the sparse but expensive-looking Scandinavian style, looking like a mid-tier lunar hotel room. Vasily himself walked in, grinning hugely, and embraced Miles in a bear hug, which nearly took all the breath out of him. He was a big man of ox-like constitution and build. He wore a slightly too tight pale blue shirt. Miles could just make out the nipples through the fabric. He had a gigantic and well-manicured short beard. The entire effect was that of a slightly artistic banker on holiday in a foreign country, which was not far from what Vasily Kandinsky had been doing for the last 5 years. The two talked conversationally about what they had been up to while Vasily fixed Miles a Bloody Mary. Vasily was rather wry and coy about his own exploits, while Miles boasted shamelessly. With a flourish, Vasily finished making the drink and handed it to the young man, beckoning him to sit down in a sleek leather armchair perpendicular to his own. Now, he said, taking a swig of his own drink, a sickly-looking caramel brown concoction, you have come to see me about the man with 1,000 eyes, referring to Pink. It's the bad guy. Yeah, man, it's pretty bad. $6 million in the hole. He says it's my arrears for a botched job. Miles swilled the olive and salami-bearing toothpick in his drink without much enthusiasm. He knows we got the money out, but it didn't come to him. Vasily's lower lip curled. Do you still have the money? Miles' hand dropped to his lap in a gesture of unqualified exasperation. No, Vasily, I don't have the money. If I had the money, I would have fucking paid him. Vasily shrugged slightly, oddly a feat gesture for a man of his bulk. If you say so. He leaned forward. And what about these others, Mr. Jones and Lonnie? Are they having the money for themselves? I don't think so. I think they're dead. And the money with them, he nodded. So, in a word, you are fucked. Miles nodded. He was fucked. But you're the best runner in the whole city. Everyone knows this. Yeah, Vasily, but you can't run if you don't have a car. He was total in the job. There was a rocket launcher. His hands flailed. It all got a bit hairy pretty quick. We come to the point, Vasily chuckled. I knew you were not just visiting me for old war stories. A skinny blonde with sharp green eyes and an angular face walked out of the room, another room past them and into the kitchen. Vanessa, he yelled, and then barked something in Russian. She threw up her hands and responded in kind. The little skirmish continued for about half a minute before she walked into the room, flipping him the bird. Vasily grinned a little sheepishly. I always tell her to stay out of the living room when I'm talking business, but she is stubborn. So he clapped his hands together manfully. You need car? This is true. You do, especially with things where they are. I will leave that there. There is after that it goes into a little bit. He sort of drops the accent a bit, and it like actually goes. You know, he becomes a little bit more of a character. But like as you can see there, that's just straight cardboard cutout. You know, so that's where that sort of started.
Incidentally, I actually didn't love that he dropped the accent because I thought that implied some inauthenticity from him. And one of the things I loved about him was he's absolutely himself, unapologetically. But that was just a story note that I left in there.
Yeah, true. I do remember you saying that.
He works well in the scene because like we were saying, you know exactly the situation he's in. He's in trouble with like some kind of Russian mobster.
Yes.
It works really well.
It does actually. There's a lot that we can imply about this guy without being need to told it necessarily, and that kind of works. It also helps, I think, the Challenger is like a big kind of action piece.
Yeah.
And we didn't touch on this, but I think there are certain like genres and subgenres where cliches are more accepted and maybe more useful than others.
Yeah, there's certainly the standard, or at least more acceptable, I suppose. Like if you're doing literary fiction, you almost—
I was just thinking literary fiction, yeah.
You almost can't write a pure cliche because it will just come across as— the whole thing about literary fiction is it's designed to be the real minutiae of what you were saying about The Naked and the Dead, James. It's like, it's really, really deep into the minutiae of it, which might appear to be boring, but is just a very, very accurate depiction of what it is. So I feel like in the case of literary fiction, you almost can't do a pure cliche.
It's painting the world in too broad strokes where it needs like a very fine detailed brush.
That's exactly right.
He's still my favorite character in the story. I love him. He's absolutely great. He's an absolute stereotype of himself. And if any Russian watchers are watching the video of this and you're absolutely outraged by the betrayal, please let us know in the comments.
Yeah, please do.
And in general, give us a shout out in the comments and let us know what you think about like stereotypes, archetypes, and what was the last one? Cliches.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll respond and we'll have a conversation because we actually do love talking about this shit. Yeah. This is what we do. We get together anyway.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this has been great. Alex, do you want to close us out with a quote?
Yeah, sure. Okay, this is a little bit of a more positive take on cliches, but it's by Terry Pratchett, the writer of the Discworld series, I guess. And he says, the reason that cliches become cliches is that they are the hammers and screwdrivers in the toolbox of communication. I think it's pretty cool.
I didn't
I
initially
like that.
I didn't initially understand that, but you guys explained it as like they're these starting point building blocks, right? From which you then work from.
Yeah, they're the basics. They're the nuts and bolts, so to speak, of or the building blocks, I guess you'd say, of communication, I suppose. Like, oh, how's it going? Yeah, it's good. Oh, the weather's a bit shit. It's I might cut that off so we can get the non-explicit.
I think it's fine at this point. I'm pretty sure we've sworn like 10 times in this. Yeah, and then the conversation develops from those mundane building blocks.
Yeah, they're like representations in the way that words represent meaning. Cliched characters represent something that has context in the world, or something that has context in the canon of the literary genre.
Yeah, they're almost placeholders, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, or symbols, right? They symbolize something. We can glance at it immediately, and we just know what that means. We've solved it, guys. We
did
it out. We'll tell Oxford University. Thank you very much. This has been very enlightening for us. We hope it has been for you as well. I'm Paddy Boylan. That's been Alex and James, and we will see you again next week for another episode of Prose Cons. Take care.
See you guys.
See ya.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.